Another series of paintings from the mid-1920s depicts a group of figures embroiled in a kind of primal struggle.
The Horde paintings, retrospectively of course, seem to embody the invasion of barbarism in culture over Europe in the 1930s. And of course they were exhibited in London, in, for example, the exhibition of 20th century German art, band art, in 1938. At the same time, Peter Turner brought out this little book as a Pelican special for the masses to buy for 2 and 6pence or something, in which he said, in what an age of darkness we must live when these things have to be stated. He reproduced the Horde paintings, and of course they weren't reflecting a reality, they were reflecting a nightmare reality. And he said, art can neither be praised nor blamed for holding up a mirror to the reality or dream world of an age. If this reality is chaotic, spectral and unreal, its reflection will be chaotic, spectral and unreal. I think there's a great German tradition behind Ernst, which makes, of course, this engagement with anti-fascist politics all the more poignant. One has only to think of his relationship with the painting, not only of his father, but of course the great German masters. And it's those masters that painted the German forest. One thinks especially of Altdorfer's rather sticky larch trees with black crows in them and monsters at the foot, or of Hans Baldung Green, and of course of Grunewald, with those paintings specifically designed for plague victims to look at, to see in the monsters some kind of mirror of their own diseases and yet the promise of salvation. Those monsters were always painted within a context of punishment and redemption, and therefore they were moralized monsters at the time, just as Ernst's Horde paintings were also not simply monstrous, but monsters bearing a moralized message about culture. Of course, while they have their iconographical sources, their unheimliche quality, their sense of eeriness is very much something to do with the monsters of the subconscious. Again, there's Freud, a modern discovery about the archaeology of the different layers of the unconscious, overlapping with primeval, much earlier images which have their cultural heritage and which Ernst brings into modernity, into the modern age, in his Horde paintings.
The first manifesto talks about exploring the unconscious, exploring dreams, which were also, in a sense, a route to hidden areas of the human psyche. And Breton certainly saw these explorations as increasingly as part of a subversion of conventional modes of thinking, modes of perceiving the world, modes of acting within the world.
The image of the petrified landscape is continued in a series of highly detailed paintings made by Ernst during the 1930s and 40s.
Well, to go to Europe after the rain, what I think is particularly poignant about it is its despair in conjunction with its visionary quality, its manner of making a universal statement, and yet the very touching personal drama that is being played out by the two figures in it. There is Max Ernst as Lop-Lop with his bird head, and behind him is a figure walking away. It's very much structurally like an Orpheus and Eurydice scenario, with him almost looking back, but in fact he doesn't look back. He will go on to America. He's turning his head. And Eurydice is being abandoned and left behind and is still looking back at that Europe after the rain. Of course, what's striking about Europe after the rain, if you compare it to his jungle pictures, is that it's dead or dying. It's rock, and therefore the idea of monsters, they're not in the lush German forest, but they're the residual beasts that are left after the Holocaust. It's lizards, creatures coming out of the stones. that sense of almost a post-nuclear desolation. That's why, looking back, it seems such a prophetic thing, because Europe was shattered. One's always in art history dealing with questions of imagination. It's difficult to imagine the complexities of Ernst's political and artistic life in the 30s. It's difficult to imagine quite how desolate, bombed and unreconstructed Europe was in the 40s. And in 1942, I mean, that's the height of the bombing raids in Europe, which Ernst was aware of as he put the finishing touches to the painting. In surrealism, there is very little explicit revolutionary content in the paintings. But if one is able to read the paintings, in particular something like Europe After the Rain, with the deep context of the time, you see how very rich and poignant some of these non-political images are.
So far, we've looked at a range of Ernst's imagery in relation to the surrealist concept of revolution. But we need also to look at the techniques Ernst used to generate this imagery. In the first manifesto, Breton indicated that forms of automatism would be the central methods of surrealist production. Automatic writing and other forms of free association had been developed by Freud in the treatment of his patients. He believed they could reveal aspects of the subject's unconscious mental activity.
There were several techniques that surrealist artists invented to, as part of their search for an equivalent to automatic writing, which had been announced as the kind of primary research tool, if you like, of the surrealists. And Max Ernst devised frottage and grattage. Grattage was a technique of applying paint in layers to the canvas and then scraping it off over a textured surface. And some of the images that are produced in those paintings hover between being, as it were, simply a texture. I mean, really, whose interest is a very, very visual one, and so embedded behind it, a recognizable image of a cityscape or a forest. In some of the paintings of the forests, or sometimes the forests themselves, the trees are actually grattages of planks of wood. So you have, I mean, as it were, in the substance, the material of the paint, you have a reference to the forest already cut down.
Collage was another important technique. Ernst had first used it while working with the Dada group in Cologne during World War I.